Hello, welcome to my garden. My name is Jolene, and today's video is a bit different than my normal content. You're in for a treat. This is Liam, my son. The video you're about to see is a very special one. My father, David Stottlemyer, gave lectures around the country on gardening with the beginner gardener in mind. I grew up traveling around the country, mostly on the West Coast, listening to my dad give this seminar series. And my sister and I heard them so many times that we always said we could recite them by heart because we knew where all his jokes were. We knew where, the different things he said. And so it holds a really special place in my heart. Finally, after many years of him giving these lectures, he put these lectures into a 5-part DVD series, and that's what you're watching today, one part of the series. Sadly, my dad passed to his rest in 2013 after a 4-year battle with thyroid cancer. To honor his legacy, our family has decided to release this 5-part DVD series onto YouTube for anyone to access and glean from his knowledge. If you would like to own this 5-part DVD series, then email me in the description down below. I have my email address down there, and we'd be happy to mail you one for the price of $24.99, which includes the shipping and the cost of the DVD. We hope you're blessed by this seminar.
Gardening is something that I really enjoy, and I didn't start out as a gardener, but I learned to like it, and eventually I studied it as a student and taught gardening classes, and it's my purpose here today to share with you some of the things I've learned about gardening and how to become a better gardener. And one important thing I think about gardening is to tie in Scripture. And so I'm going to be sharing with you some passages that mean something to me and show you how Scripture and gardening go together hand in hand. And we can learn from each lessons that can enrich our lives. It says in Genesis chapter 2, verse 8, "And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed." If you notice the word planted a garden, now when God spoke things into existence, they were perfect. And yet he took the time, a special effort, to make a place, a garden for Adam and Eve. Above and beyond what he had already created, he planted a garden eastward in Eden. And that's where he placed the man and the woman that he had created, perfect from his hands. Genesis 8:22 says, "While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease." Not only did God put them in the garden to begin with, but he indicates that there's going to be seed time and harvest and seasons that will continue into the end of time. So we start out in a situation, a garden setting, and we will be gardening throughout the rest of our lives and until Christ comes. Leviticus 26, verses 2 through 5. "Ye shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. If ye walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them, then will I give you rain in due season, and the land shall yield her increase, and the trees of the field shall yield her fruit. And your threshing shall reach unto the vintage, and the vintage shall reach unto the sowing time, and ye shall eat of your bread to the full, and dwell in your land safely." Notice you will have different harvests, and the crops that you harvest will last into the next harvest. And that's one of the promises of faithfulness, keeping the Sabbaths, the statutes, the commandments of the Lord, and he's going to send rain in due season. This is from medical ministry. "Let men and women work in the field and orchard and garden. This will bring health and strength to nerve and muscle. Living indoors and cherishing invalidism is a very poor business. If those who are sick will give nerves and muscles and sinews proper exercise in the open air, their health will be renewed." So there's health benefits to working in the garden. And if we spend time out in God's nature, enjoy the things that He has created, including in the garden, not limited to the garden, but including that, it can have health benefits that accrue to us. So how do we get started? What do we do? How do we prepare the garden and plant? First, you need to select a site. Now, there's different criteria for selecting a site. Some of the things you want to look for, you want 6 hours of direct sunlight or more. More is better. Deep, rich soil is the best if you have a choice. Some people live in areas where they don't have much soil. In that case, you may have to make a raised bed and bring soil in. Avoid low spots. That's not only because a low spot will flood and have water accumulate there, which makes for a poor garden, but also during the winter, cold air, frost, will accumulate in low spots. It flows just like water does into low areas and will accumulate. You want to locate near a water source. Water is very important for a garden. Unless you live in an area where you get rainfall on a regular basis to supply all your water needs, you need to have your garden somewhere with access to water. It needs to be close because moving water around, water's pretty heavy and it's hard to carry water in buckets and so forth to water your garden. Seedbed design. You found a spot for your garden. Now how are you going to lay it out? Now you could put things in rows. This is traditional agriculture tends to do this, mechanical or commercial agriculture. It's easy to prepare the soil. You can run in with a piece of equipment or a rototiller. You have good access to your plants because they're all nice straight rows and you can walk in between the rows of plants and do your harvesting, do your weeding, whatever it is, side dressing of fertilizer. It's easy to do that if you plant things in a nice row. But it's not a very efficient use of your garden space, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. It's designed for mechanized agriculture, beginning with horses. They pretty quick figured out if you have a horse and you're pulling implements through the field to do different cultivation or other work, you don't want the horse trampling on your plants, so they would plant in rows and then leave a space for the horse to walk, and the wheels of the whatever tool they were pulling through could go down in between without crushing the crops. And then, of course, when tractors came along, they did the same thing. They'll plant in rows, and then the tractor tires can go in between those rows, and you have mechanized agriculture, do a lot of work in a short period of time, very efficient. And here's a picture of a row. This is being irrigated. You can see the water, and it stretches far into the distance. Something like that is, you aren't going to do that by hand. You're going to do that with some sort of equipment, tractor, and so forth. And that's what that layout is really designed for. But you can also put things in beds, and I'm not advocating one over the other because some people need to do their work by hand and other people need to use tractors or rototillers. People that may not be able to get out and do the handwork may have to use a rototiller. But if you could plant your things in a bed, there are advantages to that. The initial setup requires a little more work because you have to get in and prepare the bed the first time, usually by hand. If you make a raised bed, it is easier on the back, and that just a little bit of raised bed can make a big difference when you're down working in the garden. It's a more efficient use of garden space, and again, we'll show how that works in just a moment. And here's an example of a raised bed. This was at our house that we had in California, and it's a mixture of lettuce and cole crop, and you can see we built a wood frame around it and raised it up off the ground, put some wood chips down here to hold the weeds down, and this was a nice little raised bed that we used for various different crops. Seedbed preparation. You want to work the soil when it's evenly moist. And if the soil is too dry, then you want to apply some water to it, get it evenly moist, allow the water to settle in for a couple of days so that it's not muddy, and then that's the time when you want to work it, when it's evenly moist. Loosen the soil as deep as possible. The idea is the plant roots are going to reach down quite deep, get nutrients, and bring them up. So the deeper you can loosen the soil, the better. Avoid compaction. Once you get the soil nice and loose, don't be walking on it. Don't, run in there with pieces of equipment to pack that soil back down. It takes a bit to get it loose, and keep it loose. Work organic material into the top layers of the soil. In nature, that's where the richest soil is found, is usually on the top, because the litter falls off the tree or the grass dies, whatever it may be, and it accumulates in the top layer, breaks down, and that's the richest area of the soil. And most of your plants, the feeder roots are found in those upper layers of the soil. And so you want to duplicate in your garden what happens in nature. So you want to add that material to the upper layers of your soil. You don't want to bury your compost down, 2 feet deep, because your plant is not going to use it as efficiently down deep as if you have it up shallow. You have the double dig method. Now, this is what I like to do in my garden. It's a good way to work up a bed. But again, for those that are not able to do this, a rototiller or some other method. But the double dig method leaves you with a very nice, well-prepared, loose garden bed. And it's a very good way of working it up. The goal is to loosen the soil down 24 inches deep. Usually the first time in virgin soil that's never been worked up, it's hard to go that deep, but that's the goal. And usually if you double dig it, then in a couple of years, you don't have to double dig it again right away, but a few years later when you double dig it the next time, you'll find the soil is loose already, and you can go a little deeper each time until you get down to around 24 inches. The upper layer of the soil is not turned over. Compost is added to the upper layer, just like you would in nature, which we talked about a moment ago. And this is what it looks like. If we had a cross section of the soil, what you do is, if this is soil here, you dig a trench coming like towards us and into the screen, and we're looking at a cross section. You take the soil out and you put that in a wheelbarrow, the first section. And you're going to put that at the other end of the garden. And we're going to make a bed that stretches to the left here, this direction. So you dig down, and then you take a spading fork, and you go down another 12 inches or so, and you just loosen the soil. Work the spading fork back and forth so that the soil's loose. And then the next thing you do is you take the soil in this section here, and you move that soil into the ditch that you prepared previously. So it'll pile up and look like so. Then you take the spading fork and work this section up, move soil from here to there, and you just keep working your way until you end up with a bed that has been double dug. And this is a bed at our house that we had in California. We are working up the bed here. This section's been worked up. The ditch is dug here for using the spading fork and loosening it. And you can see the wheelbarrow is full of dirt, because when you get done, you'll end up with a trench somewhere up in this section, and then you dump that dirt into the final trench, and you have a completed bed. You work it up. We have a little video at the end of this that'll kind of show how this works. And this is what the bed looks like, the garden looks like when it's completed. The bed that you saw being double dug was this bed right here. And you can see the corn at different stages of growth, green beans, onions, these are onions. And a nice double dug bed will be automatically raised a little from fluffing the soil, and it'll stay soft for several years. Now you're ready to plant. You've prepared the bed by whatever method you've chosen, and you're ready to do some planting. You want to select the seed. Well, how do I know what sort of seed I'm going to grow? They fall into basically 2 categories. You have your cool season crops and your warm season crops. Now, the cool season crops, the edible part is the root, stem, leaf, or flower. That's the part that you're eating. With the warm season crop, the edible part is the fruit or seed, whether it's mature or immature. The cool season crop can tolerate light frosts, where the warm season crop doesn't like frost at all. Your cool season crop can germinate, the seeds can germinate in cool soil, where the warm season crop needs warm soil. The root systems are shallow over here. The warm season, the root systems tend to be very deep. And the cool season crops are called true vegetables. Warm season crops are called fruiting vegetables. Some examples of these are as follows. You have over here, what part of the carrot, or what are you eating when you eat a carrot? You got a root. That's right. And the onion is what? Anyone remember that? It's a stem. If you see an onion, you'll notice you have the bulb, and then there's roots coming out the bottom of that, all right? So an onion is not a root. A lot of people think an onion is a root crop. It's actually a stem, and the bulb is the stem. Spinach, you're eating the leaf. What are you eating with broccoli?
Flower.
The flower, that's right. And cauliflower, same thing. Over here, the edible part is the fruit or seed. Squash, you're eating fruit. Tomato fruit. The bean, you're eating the fruit or the seed, depending on what part of it you're eating. Corn, you're eating what? Seed, and it's immature, it hasn't dried. Unless you're eating the corn as, cornmeal or something where it's dried. So here you have your warm and cool season crop, and you can kind of tell the difference between the two based on the part of the plant that you eat. Now that's interesting because there's a verse in the Bible, in Genesis 1:29, it says, "And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat." When God gave Adam and Eve food to eat, were they warm season crops or cool season crops? Warm season crops. Because what were they eating? They were eating the fruit and seed part. Okay? They were eating warm season crop. If you think about it, when you eat a cool season crop, what are you doing to the plant? You're damaging it. When you eat a carrot, what have you done to that plant? You've killed it, basically. And yet before sin came into the world, there was no death. And you can see that reflected in the materials that God gave to Adam and Eve to eat. When you eat a fruit, you do not hurt the tree. The fruit is extra, and it's designed to come off the tree, all right? You don't hurt the tree when you pluck the fruit off. And the same with the seed. The seed is extra. And it doesn't hurt the plant to harvest the seed. Whereas if you cut off a piece of lettuce, a head of lettuce, you've severely damaged and even killed the plant. With the true vegetables, you have death. And the vegetables were given to Adam and Eve to eat after sin. What about hybrid seed? People sometimes ask me about using hybrid seed. Here's a verse that people will occasionally quote. Leviticus 19:19, "Ye shall keep my statutes. Thou shalt not let thy cattle gender with a diverse kind. Thou shalt not sow thy field with mingled seed." What about this mingled seed? Is that talking about hybrid seed? I don't believe it is, but if somebody is convicted on a point like this based on this verse, I wouldn't argue with them. But a lot of your fruits are naturally hybrid, and there's really nothing wrong with hybrid. That's something normal in nature. The problem is when man starts messing around and creating hybrids where in the process of breeding you start losing nutrients or you lose flavor, or worse yet, when man takes genes out of unrelated organisms, like out of animals, and puts them into plants, that's genetic modification, then you have a problem. How do you avoid such things? Well, there are catalogs, and I have some here, like my Peaceful Valley Farm Supply or Baker's, or even Johnny Selected Seed. And these companies will specialize and make sure that they have seed that is not genetically modified. And so if you want to avoid those things, you can get that type of seed. If you want to avoid hybrid seed or seed that might be the result of gene splicing, look for the words heirloom or open pollinated seed. Most seed companies carry such seed, and some specialize only in heirloom varieties. I have one here called Baker Seed, heirloom seed, and they have just all heirloom varieties, open pollinated varieties. Here's a picture I took at a nursery that had a whole row of heirloom tomatoes. And I talked to my wife about it, and we decided, I went and first I got this picture. I was real excited about all those heirlooms, and so when we went back, just like a week or two later, there were hardly any left. People had already bought them, almost all of them. In fact, they had a variety of tomato there called the Kellogg, and I really wanted to get that because of the Kellogg Association, and I thought, that'd be interesting to try the Kellogg tomato and see what it's like, but they didn't have them left when I went back to get them. How deep do I plant the seed? Well, there's a guideline on the seed package that's usually fairly accurate. I had it was in Pathfinders, and I was teaching gardening, and there was this one Pathfinder who would come to me and would ask me, Mr. David, how deep do I plant the seed? And I would say, well, what does it say on the seed package? And so he would take the seed package and he would read, well, plant the seed a ½ inch deep and so far apart. And I would usually stop and think, and I think a ½ inch deep is about right. Why don't you try that? And so he'd go, and a few minutes later he'd be back. Mr. David, how deep do I plant this variety, this seed? And I would say, well, what does it say on the seed package? I did that several times and he never caught on that I was just telling him what the seed package said. But it's a good guideline, really is. Try it. I mean, if you don't know how deep to plant it, read the seed package. You may not have the seed package, so then what do you do? If somebody gives you some seed, well, there's a rule of thumb that says plant at a depth 4 times the diameter of the seed. Well, that's not asking you to get a little measuring tape and to measure the diameter of the seed, but what that's really saying is the bigger the seed, the deeper you plant it. And that's a pretty good guideline. If it's a real small seed, it goes shallow. Big seed goes a lot deeper. There are some exceptions where you want to plant things either deeper or shallower than it says. If you have sandy soil or hot, dry, windy conditions, you can go deeper. If you have clay soil or shade, wet, cool conditions, then you can plant things shallower and get away with it. Killing by kindness. This can be a problem out in the garden, believe it or not. Over-preparing the seed bed. You don't want to pulverize the soil into a fine dust. There was a point where my dad came home, I believe this was in the 70s, and he said, if we can't eat it, we're not going to water it. My dad was a little tight with money, and so out went our lawn and a lot of other things that we had around the house and some of our flowers and stuff. And our front yard was no longer a yard. We were going to have a garden. Well, I had never gardened before in my life, up to that point. And I was probably a junior or senior in high school. And my brother, I have 2 younger brothers, they're twins. And the oldest of the 2, he and I decided we were going to grow carrots. We wanted to have the world's best carrots. And so we decided if you're going to grow carrots, you want the soil to be nice and loose. No rocks, you don't want that carrot to go down and hit a rock and to be all twisted and mangled or something. So we got some window screen, and we were out there with our shovels, and we screened that soil. Every rock was gone, and we had this fine dust. We made a bed about 3 feet by 3 feet, and we planted our carrot seeds in this nice fine soil. And when that stuff got wet, it turned into mud, and when it dried, it was a brick. We had this big brick, 3 feet by 3 feet out in the garden, and those poor little carrots, the few that germinated and grew, they were twisted and mangled and dwarfed, and it was the saddest thing. And that was my first gardening experience, and I fell in love with it. It's amazing how that happens. But so you don't want to over-prepare your seed bed. Another thing you don't want to do is being too gentle with the seed. Seeds need good contact with the soil to germinate. And I don't know why this is, but it typically, when I was teaching gardening class, it seemed to be the girls that had this problem, but they would get the seed and they would dig a little ditch and they would put the seed in ever so gentle, and then they would just kind of cover the seed just real gentle. And I try to tell them, you need to pat it in. It's got to be, the seed has to make good contact with the soil in order for it to germinate and grow. And if you don't have that good contact, you get very poor germination, if any at all. So you don't want to kill your little seeds with kindness. Seed spacing. Now you can plant things in a traditional row. You can have a compact spacing, or you can do intensive spacing. These are 3 options, and we'll show the difference between each one of them. Your traditional spacing would look like this. This is like what the seed packages call for. This is what commercial agriculture does. Typically you have a row of crop, and then in between you have usually 18 inches between rows. And in this case I'm growing a crop like, say, lettuce that's maybe 6 inches apart down here, you could see. And from this side to this side we have 36 inches. And in this bed, which is about 5.5 feet long by 36 inches, 3 feet wide, we would have 36 plants. See that? But what if we were to make this into a bed and we left the 18-inch row on either side here, but in this middle 2 rows, we just filled them up with plants? That would be a compact spacing, and it would look like this. Now notice, instead of 6 plants, we have 84 plants in the same amount of space. Now you still have 18 inches on either side to walk and to do your work and to reach into the bed and weed and harvest and so forth, but you have, in the same amount of space, a lot more plants, more efficient use of space. But it can be even more efficient than this, because if you notice, you got some little areas there in between the plants. So now we can go to the intensive spacing, and that's what this would look like. You kind of shift everything a little bit, move it over, and now you have 108 plants in the same amount of space that you before had 36. You see how it's much more efficient in using the space? And because these plants fill in and the leaves kind of touch each other, they shade the ground. Initially you have to do some weeding by hand, but later, because it shades the area, it suppresses the weeds, you have very little weed problem down the way. Now I use a triangle to plant, and you can see a little red triangle here at the bottom to plant my plants using this spacing method. And here I have a variety of triangles for different crops. I have a 10-inch one, and this is my 6-inch. It's very dirty because I've been using it out a lot. 7 inches, 8 inches. This one's made out of some sort of a hard material. Large one, 18 inches for corn. Use a 15-inch one for different crops. And what you do is you plant a seed at each corner of the triangle. And then after it's planted, you move along. And this results in a bed where every plant is, if you're using this one, every plant is 18 inches from all its neighbors. And we'll demonstrate this more later. So here's my corn bed, and I have the triangle laying down there, and you can see the little corn plants growing at the corner of each triangle. So the intensive method results in yields that can be up to 4 times as much on the same amount of land, so it's an efficient use of space and land. The water use is usually more efficient because you're not watering empty ground, you're watering where the plants are. Weeding, it's a little harder at first because you have to do some hand weeding, but later on it's usually easier because the plants grow up and shade the ground. So how do you determine how far apart to put the plants? Well, there are books that will tell you. I have one here called How to Grow More Vegetables by John Jevons. Now, they've come out with several different later editions. This is the 3rd edition. I think they're up to edition number 6 now. It's a lot thicker book than this one. It's a very good book. It has a lot of information about planting and spacing. Now, for some of you, you should be aware that they have a little bit of kind of new agey stuff in here, which I pretty much just ignore. But as far as the companion planting information and spacing, this is a good book. But you can also just utilize information off the seed package. And if you notice here, I have a photograph of a package of beans from Burpees. And if we blow up the section where it talks about planting the seed, notice here that they have a section where it talks about planting these things in rows 1.5 to 2.5 feet apart. That's for commercial agriculture. That's planting things in a straight row. That's not for planting it intensively. But if you go down a little lower, you'll notice here it says thin gradually to stand 4 to 6 inches apart. That's what you're looking for. How far apart do these plants have to be when they are going to be mature? 4 to 6 inches apart. In this case, usually I would start with the larger triangle, a 6-inch triangle, to plant these so that all the plants are 6 inches apart. And then I would take notes, and if it works at 6 inches, great. And if not, I would put in my notes I need to use a larger triangle or a smaller triangle, and you adjust things a little bit. But usually if you start off with information like this off the seed package, it gets you very close to what you want to use as far as spacing. Now here's an example of a layout, a garden layout. I did this for the Loma Linda Garden Community Garden Center, where I gave a series of talks, and each person had a plot of land 8 feet by 12 feet. And so I'm just showing you what you can do with the same piece of land. In this case on the left, we planted using just rows. And you can see I have carrot, broccoli, onions. These are the winter crop. This is Southern California. You can grow these things during the winter. And then here on the right, I have the bed dug up into 2 beds actually, and I planted intensively all the crops except for my carrots. Real small seed. I don't bother trying to do those intensively. I just plant them in rows. But everything else I planted using the little triangles. And you could see by comparing them that on the same amount of space, here with a trail, a path down the middle, you get quite a bit more. You have broccoli 6 over here on this side, 8 over here on this side. With cauliflower you have 6, cauliflower on this side intensively you have 9, and so forth. Shallots you have 13, shallots you have 33. Do you like shallots? Yeah, I like shallot. My wife likes shallots. We haven't grown much yet, but I'm hoping next year. Interesting quote. Let the teachers wake up to the importance of this subject and teach agriculture and other industries that is essential for the student to understand. Seek in every department of labor to reach the very best results. Let the science of the Word of God be brought into the work, that the students may understand correct principles and may reach the highest possible standard. Exert your God-given abilities and bring all your energies into the development of the Lord's farm. And I like this part next. Study and labor that the best results and the greatest returns may come from the seed sowing, that there may be an abundant supply of food, both temporal and spiritual. We need to be efficient in our use of the land and efficient in sowing seed spiritually. Okay, for the increased number of students that shall be gathered in to be trained as Christian workers. Transplanting. You prepare a bed, maybe you're going to plant some seed, and maybe you're going to do some transplanting into the garden. How do you handle the transplanting? This allows you to start plants before the frost-free date or when the soil is ready. It allows you to avoid seedling hazards like birds or insects or inclement weather. And that can be a big problem in some areas, inclement weather. We just had a hailstorm a couple days ago. And, I had moved my plants inside so they were protected because I had them in little flats, and I'm starting them and preparing for when they're going to go outside. If they had been outside, the hail would have done quite a bit of damage to them. It works well when using the intensive method because you use the little triangle and you can put your plants at the corner of each triangle and have a nice intensive garden by transplanting. What do you want to transplant? There are some things that are easy to transplant. That includes tomatoes, peppers, eggplant. Onions are pretty easy to transplant. Cabbage family like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, cabbage. There are some things that are a little more difficult, and I call that not so easy. And I'm not saying it's impossible because I know of people that have transplanted these items without any problem at all. It takes a little more effort. That's things like beans, peas, corn, melon, and root crops like carrot, turnip, beets. The reason why most of these crops are not easy is that when the seed germinates, it sends down a long taproot, and that taproot is very easily damaged. So if you go to try to dig that plant up, you damage that root, and then the plant is set back and doesn't do very well. In fact, I had another instance where this guy was not working in his garden, and I warned him that if he didn't get stuff into his bed, that he was going to lose some points. So he went to the store and he bought some corn and transplanted it into his garden. It just so happened I was there that day working and saw there was a girl right next to him, had a bed right next to him, and she was planting corn as well. And her corn, believe it or not, germinated and grew up and passed up his corn. His corn just sat there because it was damaged in the transplanting. And so it had to kind of overcome the damage that had been done to it, and it just sat there while hers grew up, and it was quite tall by the time his started to grow, and hers had a better harvest and sooner, and it passed his up. If they were having a race, it won. When are they ready? When seedlings are a 1/2 inch to 1 inch tall. When the first pair of true leaves have formed. Now, when you first plant a seed, the first leaves you see are not true leaves. They're actually cotyledons. It's part of the storage of the seed. It nurses the plant along until the true leaves can start photosynthesizing and produce enough sugars to carry that plant along. And so you'll see these cotyledons. Here's the cotyledons on this little plant. They're usually kind of a roundish shape. And most of you have seen that. If you plant tomatoes, the first leaves that come out are long and thin, and the rest of the leaves have the serrated, normal tomato look. So you watch for the true leaves to form, and that's when you transplant it, because when all you see are the cotyledons, and those are trying to feed your plant, and then you try to transplant it on top of that, the poor little plant is doing a double duty. It's trying to overcome the shock of being transplanted, and it's trying to put out true leaves, and that's not good for the plant. So wait until you see the true leaves before you transplant. Next thing you want to do is harden your plant off. And that's gradually exposing your young plants to outdoor conditions by setting them outside for greater periods of time each day, starting up to 2 weeks before you intend to transplant. The minimum is about 2 days. Usually I take several days. The first day, I'll take my plants and put them outside for a couple hours in the sun, bring them in. Next day, I'll put them out for more time, bring them in. Within 3 or 4 days, I'm leaving them out all night. And if there's a little bit of wind, that's fine. It strengthens the plant up. It gets it used to being outside, and then transplant it into the garden. So you've given it a chance to adjust to outdoor conditions. Because see, it's been living inside or in a greenhouse or in your house and enjoying the nice warmth. And it needs to be outside and get a little hardened off, get some sun, get a tan, whatever it needs, in order to be ready to be placed out in the cruel world. The last step is transplanting. You want to keep as much soil around the roots as possible. If root bound, you want to spread the roots out a little bit. Plant in a hole up to the first set of true leaves, and then you want to press the soil firmly around the roots, but do not pack. Again, you want to watch out for extremes. You don't want to just kill with kindness and barely put any soil around it. On the other hand, you don't want to get in there with your boots and press it down real hard either. You want to put the soil in and pack it in with your hands and get good contact between the soil and the roots of your new plant. And then you want to water it thoroughly and shade it if possible. Here's an example of a tomato plant. You notice it's a little deeper than it was originally growing, and you're going to bury it up so deep. Now, tomatoes are kind of unique because tomatoes can get what's called leggy. They get really tall, and you can bury them a lot deeper, and any part that's buried underground will put on roots. So in a case like this, if you have one that's tall, you just bury it deeper, and all of this area here will put out roots. Now, not all plants will do that, but tomatoes will. So you can put them, even if they're tall and leggy, you can bury them a little deeper, build a trench, or just put a deeper hole and bury them up to the first set of leaves, and they'll do great. And when you're done, you'll have a garden like this, which that's not our garden, by the way. I got that off the internet. I kind of cheated, but that is a nice, pretty garden. And there's nothing wrong, by the way, with having a pretty garden. If you go out into the garden, there's some flowers and some pretty plants to enjoy. I encourage that. Now we have a little video here at the end, and it's going to demonstrate double digging. As you can see here, I'm starting to dig a trench along this end. You can see there's compost on the surface. The soil here looks dry. This is because it's Southern California at the time we were living there, and that's just the way the soil looks. We'll see a gopher hole in just a moment. Watch down in this section. You'll see a gopher hole. I think it's this next shovelful. Nope. There it is. See it right there? A little gopher hole. We had gopher problems, and I would trap and try to get rid of them. So you dig your first trench, and you go down about as deep as my shovel. Now, I had double dug this bed years before, probably 5, 6 years before, maybe even longer than that. And the soil is still loose, notice? So I'm cleaning out the bottom of the trench, and I'm putting all that soil into my wheelbarrow. And then the next step will be to get a spading fork. And I would encourage any of you, if you're going to do this type of work in your garden, double digging, that you buy a good quality spading fork. Spend a little extra money if you have to. Get one that's hand forged in England. There I'm showing how deep it is with the shovel. And here's my spading fork. I've had this fork for probably 20 years, and it's only this last year I bent one of the tines when I was working in my garden. And so I press that spading fork down into the soil, and you notice I'm not lifting the soil out. I'm just working it back and forth to loosen and to fluff that soil up. And I work my way across the bottom of that trench that I dug, loosening the soil down deep. And I'm going down as deep as those tines. So probably when I'm done with this section, I've gone down probably close to 20 inches deep or so. Okay, now I'm going to get the shovel, and I'm going to move dirt from this section into the trench that I just made and then loosened. And I'm leaving the topsoil as topsoil. See that? This stuff on the top is staying on top pretty much. And in the process of double digging, all this compost that I have here on the surface is being worked into the soil at the same time, into the top layers of the soil. This harkens back to the era of silent movies. We need an organist to play some background music here. So I clean out the bottom of this trench, and I put that soil on top. And usually what I end up doing is there's more soil than I have room on top of my little ditch, so I'll end up cleaning it out and putting it in the wheelbarrow. See there, I'm putting the extra into the wheelbarrow. And the wheelbarrow, the soil is going to go to the far end of the trench, as you'll see in a moment. Fill up the last trench. Don't worry, you're not going to have to watch me double dig the whole thing. We're just a couple of, a row or two here, and then we'll move on to something else. All right, there I'm loosening the soil for the next section. And so you continue to do this, working your way piece by piece until you're done with the bed. And notice here I've completely double dug the entire bed. And now I'm ready to take the soil that came out of the first trench, and I'm going to put it in the final trench at the end. So I dump this in, and you notice that by double digging the garden, you can see how the bed has been raised or fluffed up. The soil is nice and loose. And doing this double dig method has resulted in an automatic raised bed without bringing in any dirt from anywhere else. Then the next step you want to do is go through this bed with a hoe and break up the dirt clods. And you want to use the hoe properly. The hoe is not to be used like a hammer or something. It's more like a knife cutting in. And you cut in and then come back out with the hoe. And it's just to break those clods up. Notice how I'm working the bed from the edge, because now that I've gotten it all loose and fluffy, you don't want to step on it and compact it. So from now on, you do everything from the edge. After you've done this, the next step will be to get a rake and to rake the bed. And again, with a rake, using a rake is kind of like using a comb. You don't When you comb your hair, you don't grab and pull real hard. Instead, you'd let the tines pass through the hair. And the same way with the rake. I'm just kind of letting the soil pass through it and breaking up clods in the process. You're not trying to pull a bunch of dirt. You may use it a little bit to shape the bed. And this will be, and I'm not trying to break every dirt clod up. You can see there's still some dirt clods left in here. Over time, nature, rainwater, and so forth will take care of the clods if you're concerned with that. What you want to do is just have a nice finished bed for planting your crop. Now I have a triangle, an 18-inch triangle, and this is for planting corn. First thing I'm going to do is lay off a section where my first row is going to be. I just use the end of my hoe to do that. Made a nice line there. I lay out my triangle, and now I'm going to get corn seed and put seed at the corner, at each corner of the triangle. Now for corn, I oftentimes will put 2 seed. Notice how I'm putting 2 seed at the corner. And that's because not all the seed will germinate, so I put 2, and if they both come up, I just pull one out. And if only one comes up, fine. But usually of the 2, you'll have at least one that germinates, and that means you won't have any spots where there's plants missing. And then when I'm done with this row, I'll just move my triangle over and use the seeds that are on the surface that I can see. And I'll lay the triangle down, and then I'll put the next row down, and so forth until my bed is planted. And by doing it this way, each plant is 18 inches from its neighbor all the way around. Next thing, the seeds are all on the surface, and you want to plant the seed. And my daughter Kayla comes in, and she's going to push the seed down into the soil about a little over 1 inch deep, and she pats it in. Want to make sure you have good contact with the soil. And that's how to prepare and plant the seed bed. And I especially appreciate the moral support my wife, Cheryl Stottlemyer, gave me during the filming of this project. At least that project. And that's all we have for today.